He ruined my life, but I will find a way to get revenge. I swear. Tears rolled down Marina's cheeks as she clutched the resignation letter in her trembling hands. What are you going to do now? Whispered Alex, her only ally in this damn place. I don't know. I need this job. I have a loan for my mother's treatment, rent, she stifled a sob. But I can't stand his touch, his looks, his threats any longer. At that moment, the restaurant's front door swung open. A massive figure of a man in a black t-shirt appeared in the doorway. His eyes slowly scanned the room, lingering on Marina and her tears. I'm told this restaurant has the best steaks in town, he said in a hoarse voice, but I see they serve fear too. No one knew that this man was Vin Diesel, owner of the Fast and Furious restaurant chain, and that night he would change everything. The most exciting part is yet to come. Stay tuned to find out how it all ends. And while you're here, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. The Fast and Furious restaurant was shining on Crescent Avenue in the heart of New York. The sophisticated interior with elements of industrial style, subdued lighting, quiet music, all this created an atmosphere of luxury and comfort. It seemed that every detail breathed success. None of the customers guessed that the man in the black t-shirt and worn jeans who had just taken his place at the bar was Vin Diesel, the owner of not only this establishment, but also the entire Fast and Furious chain, spread across 12 states. Today, he was here not as a boss, but as a secret observer. He didn't like what he'd heard about his New York flagship in recent weeks. The falling revenue, the staff turnover, the strange anonymous complaints that never reached management. Something was wrong, and routine checks hadn't turned up anything. So Vin decided to check it out himself, without warning or fanfare. Just a guy who'd stopped by for dinner. He took a sip of whiskey from a heavy glass and looked around the room. It was Friday evening, peak business time. Waiters glided between tables, bartenders mixed cocktails with virtuosity, and chefs created culinary masterpieces in the open kitchen. At first glance, everything worked like a well-oiled machine. "What will you order, sir?" asked the young bartender, wiping down the counter in front of Vin. "Your signature steak and another whiskey." Vin deliberately did not give his name or title. He wanted to show the real face of his restaurant. The bartender, whose name tag read Jason, nodded and went to take the order to the kitchen. Vin continued to watch. His attention was drawn to a tall man in a crisp white shirt with slicked back dark hair and sharp features. He stood at the entrance to the room, watching the staff with an expression of cold superiority. A badge glittered on his chest that read, Richard Morton, Manager. There was something odd about the way the staff reacted to his presence. No smiles, no jokes, just tense backs and downcast eyes. Waiters would shift their movements to avoid passing too close to him. Even the hostess greeting guests at the entrance visibly tensed up when Morton was nearby. Interesting, Vin thought, making a mental note. At that moment, a sound that stood out from the restaurant's overall symphony caught his attention. A muffled sob coming from the corridor leading to the back rooms. He turned his head and saw a young woman emerging from the staff toilet. She was wiping her eyes and trying to straighten herself out, but her hands were visibly shaking. Her name tag read, Marina. Vin glanced at Morton. The manager had noticed the girl too, and his face was distorted with irritation. He strode toward her, grabbed her elbow and hissed something in her ear. Vin couldn't hear the words, but he saw the girl turn pale, her shoulders slump in a gesture of absolute defeat. Your steak, sir. Jason's voice brought Vin out of his observation. Medium, as you requested. Thank you. Vin looked down at his plate, but his thoughts were far from the food. Tell me, Jason, how long has Marina been working here? The bartender tensed, his hands frozen. Marina, about a year. Why are you asking? She just seems upset. Problems with clients? Jason glanced quickly at the manager, then went back to wiping the already clean glasses. No, not with clients, he finally said quietly. Look, I can't talk about this. I need this job. Vin nodded without insisting. He cut a piece of steak. The meat was perfectly cooked, juicy, flavorful. His chef Antonio did not disappoint, but the atmosphere in the restaurant spoiled his appetite. After dinner, Vin decided to stay longer. He moved to a table in the corner of the room, ordered coffee, and continued to watch. The restaurant was gradually emptying, and it was closing time. The staff began to tidy up the room after a busy evening, and that's when Vin noticed that Morton had pulled Marina aside and was quietly but insistently telling her something. The girl listened to him with her head down, her hands clutching the edge of her apron so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Vin decided it was time to take action. He stood up and walked over to the bar where Jason was finishing cleaning up. "Hey, Jason," he began casually. "How long has Morton been working here?" The bartender winced when he heard the manager's name. "A year and a half. He came with recommendations from an expensive restaurant in Los Angeles." "Why do you ask?" "Because I can see that something is wrong here," Vin answered bluntly. "And it has to do with him, right?" Jason froze, then looked around to see if anyone could hear them. "Look, I don't know who you are, but if you're just a client, stay away from all this. And if you're from the management company, then you should know that Morton is not who he says he is." "Tell me." Vin's voice became quieter but more insistent. Jason hesitated. Vin could see the internal struggle on his face, fear versus the desire to change something. He harasses the staff, especially the women, especially Marina." "What do you mean exhausts?" "He makes her stay after hours alone, says it's for special training, but we all know that's not true. Marina cries almost every shift. She's afraid of losing her job. Her mother is in the hospital, medical bills, she can't just leave." Vin felt anger boiling inside him. He always made sure his restaurants treated their employees with respect. And now this was happening at his flagship? Why didn't anyone report this to management? Jason smiled bitterly. "We tried. 3 people wrote complaints. All 3 were fired a week later, allegedly for professional incompetence. Morton has connections at the head office. All complaints are hushed up." Vin gritted his teeth. If this was true, then the problem was much deeper than he thought. "Thanks for your honesty, Jason. He was interrupted by a sharp sound, the tinkle of broken glass. They turned to see Marina standing over the shards of glass. Morton was looming over her, his face contorted with ill-concealed rage. "This is the 2nd glass this week," he said through clenched teeth. "You know the rules. The cost will be deducted from your pay." "I'm sorry, Mr. Morton." Marina's voice trembled. "It was an accident. I'm not interested in your excuses," Morton cut her off. "After closing, come into my office for a talk." His tone left no doubt that the conversation would not be limited to a discussion of broken dishes. Marina turned even paler, if that was even possible, and nodded without looking up. Vin decided he had seen enough. He couldn't let this go on for another minute. He stood up and walked straight towards Morton and Marina. "Excuse me," he said to the manager in a deliberately polite tone. "I think I knocked into the table when I passed by. The girl had nothing to do with it." Morton turned and his face changed instantly, a mask of professional courtesy hiding his irritation. "Don't worry, sir. We'll sort it out. I hope you enjoyed your dinner." "The food was excellent," Vin said, not looking away, "but the atmosphere leaves much to be desired, especially the way you treat the staff." Marina looked up, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Morton tensed, his smile strained. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is an internal restaurant matter. If you have any comments, I'd be happy to hear them. Tomorrow. We're closing. And I think now is the time." Vin took a step forward, and now there was no more than a meter between him and Morton. "Because I'm not just here as a visitor." Morton frowned. "What do you mean?" Vin pulled a card out of his pocket, an ID card for the owner of the Forsage restaurant chain. The card had his photo and full name on it. "My name is Vin Diesel, and I am the owner of this restaurant." The sound Morton made was like a strangled squeak. His face turned the color of fresh dough. Marina gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Jason, who had been watching the scene from the bar, froze, holding a towel. "Mr. Diesel, we didn't expect—" "Obviously," Vin replied dryly. "Now I'd like to speak with you alone. In your office." Morton nodded, nervously adjusting his tie. He was clearly shaken but trying to keep his face. "Of course, sir. Right now." "Right now!" Vin's voice left no doubt that this was not a request, but an order. Morton turned and headed toward his office. Vin followed him, but before he left, he turned to Marina. "Don't go anywhere," he said quietly. "I'll need to talk to you later." Her eyes were wide open, with a look of disbelief mixed with a glimmer of hope. "Yes, sir," she whispered. Vin nodded and followed Morton, a difficult conversation awaiting him. Richard Morton's office was furnished with a pretentious luxury that immediately caught Vin's eye. A leather chair, clearly more expensive than the restaurant's budget allowed, a massive mahogany table, a bar with a collection of premium whiskeys. All of this contrasted too much with the modest conditions of the staff lounge that Vin had briefly seen on the way. Morton gestured nervously toward the visitor's chair. "Please, Mr. Diesel, may I offer you a drink?" "No," Vin snapped, sitting down. "I'm not here for small talk." Morton walked around the desk and sank into his chair. His hands were shaking slightly, but he tried to hold himself steady. "Of course, sir, I understand. If I had known about your visit in advance—" "What?" Vin interrupted. "Put on a show? Make everyone smile and pretend like everything was okay? That was the whole point of my incognito, Mr. Morton. I wanted to see the real picture." Morton swallowed. "And what are your impressions, sir?" "Disgusting," Vin replied bluntly. "I see a restaurant where the staff is intimidated. I see a young woman in tears. I see a manager who seems to enjoy his power more than he should. Sir, I assure you there is some misunderstanding here." Vin raised his hand, stopping him. "Tell me about Marina." Morton tensed, his eyes narrowing. "Marina? She's a good worker, but a little emotional. She has personal problems that sometimes affect her work." "Personal problems? What kind?" "Her mother is seriously ill. She has terminal cancer. Marina is the only breadwinner in the family, paying the medical bills. She is very dependent on this job." Vin listened carefully, noting how easily Morton spoke about it, without a hint of sympathy. "And you use this to pressure her?" Morton visibly flinched. "Excuse me? I don't understand what you mean." "Jason told me about the special training after hours, about how you force her to be alone with you, about how she cries almost every day." "Jason?" Morton's face twisted in anger. "That drunk? He's under threat of being fired and trying to smear me." "Stop it." Vin's voice was quieter, but there was steel in it. "I wasn't born yesterday, Morton. I've seen the way the staff reacts to you. I've seen the fear in Marina's eyes, and I've heard of complaints that mysteriously disappeared before they reached me." Morton shifted in his chair. "Sir, in the restaurant business, there are always disgruntled employees. My job is to maintain discipline and standards. Sometimes this requires strictness." "Discipline and bullying are two different things," Vin snapped. "Like strictness and bullying. Don't try to confuse the two." He took out his phone and placed it on the table between them. "You know what I have here? A recording of my conversation with Jason and two other employees I managed to talk to while you were doing your thing. And you know what's even more interesting? Security footage from the last 2 months, which I requested this morning, having a feeling that something was wrong." It was a bluff. He had no CCTV footage yet. But judging by the way Morton turned pale, the threat had hit home. "Cameras," the manager muttered. "But there are no cameras in my office. That's a violation of privacy." "Yeah, not in the office," Vin agreed. "But they're in the hallway, and in the hall, and they record who comes into your office and when, and how long they spend there." Morton licked his dry lips. "Mr. Diesel, I think there's some misunderstanding here. I've always acted in the best interests of the restaurant." "For your own benefit," Vin corrected him harshly. "And you know what's most disgusting? That you exploited Marina's vulnerability, her fear of losing the job she needed to save her mother." He leaned forward and Morton involuntarily recoiled. "I built this chain from scratch, Morton. I know what it's like to work hard. I know what it's like to fear for the future. And that's why I've always demanded that my restaurants treat their staff with respect. And you've betrayed that trust." "Sir, I'm not finished," Vin cut him off. "You're going to pack your things and leave this restaurant. Forever. Your contract is terminated. And don't worry about references. I'll personally make sure that the New York restaurant business knows everything it needs to know about you." Morton's face contorted with rage. "You can't. I have a contract. I have connections. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Vin stood up, towering over the table. "No, you had no idea who you were dealing with when you decided you could bully my employees with impunity. You have 15 minutes. After that, I'll call security." Morton also jumped up, his face red with anger. "You'll regret this. I'll sue. Go ahead," Vin replied calmly. "I'd be happy to meet you in court, where all the details of your management will come out, including what happened behind the closed doors of this office." It worked. Morton paused, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. 15 minutes, Vin repeated, heading for the door. "And don't even think about going near Marina or any of the staff." He walked out of the office, closing the door tightly behind him. Jason, Marina, and several other employees who had not gone home after closing time were waiting for him in the hallway. They all looked at him with expressions of shock, disbelief, and glimmers of hope. Mr. Diesel, Marina began, her voice shaking. I don't understand. Are you really the owner? Yes, Vin replied simply. And I'm very sorry I didn't know what was going on here sooner. Marina lowered her eyes. Nobody wanted to talk. We were afraid. He has connections at head office. He always said he could fire any of us with one call. That was a lie, Vin said firmly. And he won't fire anyone else, because he's leaving this restaurant, now. A collective sigh of relief swept through the hallway. Jason stepped forward. Sir, are you sure? He really has influence. A few months ago, Sarah, our former hostess, filed a complaint, and a week later she was fired for allegedly being late, although she was never late. I'll get to the bottom of this, Vin promised, and whoever at headquarters covered for him. But first, he turned to Marina. I need to hear the full story. From you. Marina nervously intertwined her fingers. I'm not sure I can... You're safe, Vin said softly. He's leaving. He's never coming back. But I need to know what happened to make sure it never happens again. Marina hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay, but not here. Of course. Let's go to the hall. They headed into the deserted restaurant, the other employees following them, as if not wanting to miss out on what could be a turning point in their working lives. They sat at a table in the corner of the room. Marina fidgeted nervously with her napkin, avoiding Vin's eyes. Jason brought them coffee, then moved away but remained within sight, support without intrusion. Tell me everything from the beginning, Vin asked softly. When did it start? Marina took a deep breath, gathering her strength. I've been working here for a year and 2 months. At first everything was fine. Morton was strict, but fair, or so it seemed. She took a sip of coffee to calm herself. Then about 3 months after I started working, my mother got sick. Lung cancer, stage 4. The prognosis wasn't good. Insurance only covered part of the treatment. I had to take a second job to keep up with the bills. I started showing up late sometimes, tired. That's understandable, Vin nodded. It happens. Morton called me into his office. He said he had noticed changes. I told him about the situation, hoping for understanding. And at first he really did understand. He even offered to help. A flexible schedule, the ability to take advances. She fell silent, collecting her thoughts. But then, everything changed. He became more attentive to me. He complimented me. He touched me, seemingly by accident. One day he suggested having dinner after work to discuss my progress. Vin listened attentively without interrupting. I refused, politely but firmly, and the next day he changed. He started picking on every little thing. He criticized me in front of everyone for folding napkins incorrectly. He started assigning the most inconvenient shifts. When I asked for an advance, and I needed money for medicine for my mother, he said it was possible, but we need to discuss it in private. Her voice wavered. I understood what he was getting at, but I couldn't leave. Where would I find another job with such a schedule and salary? Mom needed treatment, without breaks. And then, she fell silent, looking down. Vin could see how hard it was for her to continue. What happened? He asked quietly. 3 months ago, my mother's condition worsened. She needed new therapy, even more expensive. I was desperate. Morton offered me a promotion, with a significant increase in salary. He said I could become a senior service manager, but... Her voice became barely audible. He said I needed to go through special training, after hours in his office. Vin felt anger boiling inside him, but he kept his cool. And you agreed? Marina nodded without looking up. The first time he just talked about work. Then he became closer, said I was special, that he could take care of me. Started touching, first my shoulders. Then, she paused, gathering her strength. I tried to politely push away, but he became more insistent. He said my career depended on it, that he could make my life very difficult. He hinted that he knew people at other restaurants and could ensure that I would not be hired anywhere if I left. Vin gritted his teeth, classic tactics of a predator using his power. 2 weeks ago, her voice broke. He tried to kiss me. I pushed him away. He got mad, said I was ungrateful, that he'd done so much for me. Since then, he's made my life miserable, nitpicking over every little detail, making me redo work 10 times, assigning me the worst tables, where the tips are minimal. She looked up, tears in her eyes. I wanted to leave, but where? With my schedule, with the need to take time off for my mother's therapy. Who would hire me? And without work, Mom would die. Vin reached out and gently touched her palm. Have you tried contacting head office? Yes, I sent a letter to HR. Anonymously, I was afraid to give my name. A week later, Morton called me in, showed me my letter, somehow he got it, and said that if I tried to make trouble again, he would destroy me. Vin made a mental note to do a thorough review with HR. If employee complaints were being funneled back to managers, the problem was systemic. You're not the only one who suffered from him? Marina shook her head. No. Before me there was Sarah, our hostess. She couldn't take it anymore and left. Then Alice, she also filed a complaint and was fired due to redundancy. Basically, he chose those who couldn't easily find another job. Single mothers, students on scholarships, people with sick relatives like me. A true predator, Vin said quietly, methodical and calculating. At that moment, Morton's office door swung open. The manager came out with a small box in his hands. Apparently, he had collected his things. Seeing Vin and Marina at the table, he froze, his face distorted with rage. You! He hissed, looking at Marina. This is all because of you. He took a step towards them, but Vin stood up, blocking Marina. Your time is up, Morton. The exit is over there. Morton glared at him. You believe this liar? She's manipulating you. She's using her sick mommy story to get preferential treatment. Marina flinched as if struck. Vin stepped forward, his voice quiet and dangerous. One more word and I'll call not only security, but the police as well. I'm sure they will be interested to know about your management style. Morton turned pale but did not give up. You don't understand who you're dealing with, Diesel. I have friends. I'm not impressed by your friends, Vin snapped. It's my friends you should be concerned about. Go away, now. For a moment it looked as if Morton was about to pounce on him, but common sense prevailed. He cast one last venomous glance at Marina, then turned and headed for the exit. This is not the end, he threw over his shoulder. You will hear from me again. The door closed behind him, and the room fell silent until Jason let out a sigh of relief. He's gone, the bartender said, as if he couldn't believe his own words. He's really gone. Marina covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Vin gently placed his hand on her shoulder. It's over. He won't come back. She looked up at him with tear-stained eyes. What now? I told all this, and what happens next? Vin sat down opposite her again. Now we're going to fix everything. Starting today. The sun was already rising over the horizon when they finished their conversation. Jason and other employees who had stayed after their shifts sat at nearby tables, occasionally interjecting their comments and observations. The story turned out to be even worse than Vin had originally imagined. Morton had created a system of intimidation in the restaurant. He surrounded himself with a few trusted employees who reported to him everything that happened in his absence. He deliberately pitted people against each other, spread rumors, created competition for shifts and tables. Women suffered especially. Marina was not the only one who was subjected to his special attention, but she was the most vulnerable because of the situation with her mother. We need to find Sarah and Alice, Vin said, making notes on his phone. I want to personally apologize to them for what happened under my command. Sarah works at a small cafe in Brooklyn now, Jason said. I can find her contact information. Thank you. What about the rest of the staff? Who else was hurt by Morton? It turned out that almost everyone did, some more than others, but the toxic atmosphere poisoned everyone's work. People were afraid to ask for time off to see a doctor, not to mention more serious family matters. They worked sick, exhausted, and intimidated. How could this have gone on for so long? Vin asked, more to himself than to those present. Why didn't anyone report this directly to me or my deputy? Marina smiled sadly. Mr. Diesel, do you realize how unreachable you seem to the average waiter or bartender? You are a legend, a man who built an empire. How can a mere employee get to you? Vin thought about it. She was right. In his quest to grow the business, he had created too many layers of management between himself and the rank and file. He had relied on reports and numbers, rather than the real stories of the people behind those numbers. That will change, and he said firmly. Starting today. He took out his phone and dialed a number. Mike, this is Vin. Yeah, I know what time it is. Listen, we have an emergency at the Fast and the Furious New York location. I'm terminating Richard Morton for professional incompetence in violation of the company code. I need you on the next flight out and take over the restaurant on an interim basis. Yeah, I know about Chicago. Find a replacement. This is non-negotiable, Mike. This is a priority. He ended the conversation and turned to the staff. Tomorrow, or rather today, the restaurant will be closed. Everyone has a paid day off. Mike Johnson, my second in command and one of the best managers I know, will be arriving tomorrow evening. He will be temporarily running the restaurant until we find a permanent replacement. The employees looked at each other with a mixture of surprise and disbelief on their faces. In terms of long-term changes, Vin continued, I will personally audit all the branches. But more importantly, we will create a new direct line to management, an anonymous hotline that will go directly to me and my team, bypassing the regional managers. He turned to Marina. As for you, I understand that no amount of money can compensate for what you've been through, but I want to offer you compensation for emotional damages and pay for your mother's treatment at the best clinic in New York. Marina froze, her eyes widening. What? No, I can't accept. You can, Vin said softly but firmly. This isn't charity. This is responsibility. My responsibility as the owner who allowed this to happen in his company. Tears filled her eyes again, but now they were tears of relief, not fear. I don't know what to say. Nothing needs to be said, Vin smiled slightly. Just get better, and help us make sure this never happens again. Vin stood up, looking around at the tired but no longer depressed-looking staff. Go home. Get some rest. Tomorrow begins a new chapter for Fast and Furious. As people filed in and left the restaurant, Vin noticed their body language changing. Shoulders straightened, smiles appeared, conversations became more animated. It was as if a heavy cloud that had been hanging over them had finally lifted. Marina was the last to leave. She turned around at the door. Mr. Diesel, thank you, not just for me, but for all of us. Vin nodded. Take care of yourself, Marina, and your mother. When she left, Vin was left alone in the empty restaurant. He walked slowly around the room, watching the first rays of sunlight filter through the stained glass windows, painting the tables and chairs warm shades of gold. He didn't start Fast and Furious just to make money. He dreamed of creating a place where people would feel at home, both customers and staff, a place built on respect and care. Somewhere along the way, that original idea got lost in the rush for expansion, in profit and loss statements, in corporate strategies. Today, he received a painful reminder of what is truly important. Vin pulled out his phone and opened his notes. He began writing a plan that would change not just this restaurant, but the entire chain. A plan based not on numbers, but on people. It would be a long road, but he was ready to take it. 3 days later, the Fast and Furious restaurant on Crescent Avenue was open again. But it was not the same restaurant that customers and employees knew a week ago. Mike Johnson, the interim manager, moved quickly and decisively. He and Vin overhauled all processes, schedules, and job descriptions. Salaries were revised upward. The tipping system, which Morton had used as another tool of control, was reworked. But the main thing is that the atmosphere changed. People smiled, joked, helped each other. Without fear, approached the management with questions and suggestions. Vin sat at the same table in the corner of the room, watching his establishment operate. This time, he was not incognito. Everyone knew who he was. And instead of creating tension, his presence seemed to inspire people. Marina approached his table, carrying a tray with coffee and dessert. She looked different, calmer, more confident. The shadows under her eyes were almost gone. Your espresso and cheesecake, Mr. Diesel, she said with a smile, setting out the plates. Thank you, Marina. And please call me Vin. I asked you to. She nodded. I haven't gotten used to it yet. So much has changed in these days. For the better, I hope. Absolutely, she answered sincerely. It's like walking out of a dark room into the light. Only now do I realize how bad it was. Vin took a sip of coffee. How is your mother? Marina's face brightened. Dr. Lewinsky, the one from the clinic you sent us to, he suggested a new treatment protocol. He says the chances have doubled. She's even smiling now, for the first time in months. That's great news, Vin said sincerely. Marina hesitated, then asked, What about Morton? We haven't heard anything about him. Vin put down the cup. He filed a complaint with the head office. He claimed that his dismissal was unlawful and demanded compensation and reinstatement. Marina tensed. And what? His complaint was reviewed and dismissed. Furthermore, we filed a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They launched an investigation. Investigation? Yes. We found a few more victims. Sarah agreed to testify, and Alice too. Marina looked both scared and hopeful. Does that mean I have to too? Only if you want it, Vin assured her. No pressure. The decision is entirely yours. She nodded, considering this information. What about those people at the head office? Those who helped him? They are no longer with the company, Vin said firmly. We conducted an internal investigation. It turns out Morton was paying 2 HR people to forward complaints to him and hide them from management. They have been fired and may face legal consequences as well. Marina exhaled. Sometimes I feel like I'm still sleeping, that this is all a dream, and I'll wake up in the same nightmare. This is not a dream, Vin said softly, and that nightmare will not come back, I promise. She smiled gratefully and was about to add something when a noise at the entrance caught her attention. She turned around and froze. Richard Morton stood at the door of the restaurant. He looked different, rumpled, unshaven, with eyes red from lack of sleep. But his gaze still held a cold fury. He glanced around the room and bumped into Marina. His lips twisted into an evil grin. Vin immediately stood up. Waiters and customers began to turn around, sensing the tension in the air. Well, well, Morton said loudly, stepping into the room. What a touching picture. The big boss and his little protege. Mike, the temporary manager, was already rushing towards him. Mr. Morton, you are not welcome here. Please leave the establishment. Or what? Morton pushed him away. Call the police, go ahead. I want everyone to know the truth about what's going on here. He turned to the hall, to the silent visitors. Do you know why I was fired? Because I refused to cover up the machinations of this establishment. Tax schemes, money laundering. Enough, Vin's voice cut through the room. You're drunk, Morton, and you're talking nonsense. Does the truth hurt your eyes? Morton turned to him. Or are you afraid I'll tell everyone how you bought that woman? How much did you pay her to slander me? To tell her heartbreaking story about her sick mother? Marina flinched as if struck. Several customers began to make indignant noise. Jason stepped forward, standing next to Marina. Get out, he said quietly but firmly. You won't intimidate anyone here again. Morton burst out laughing. And who will stop me? You, an alcoholic? Or this crybaby with her made-up stories? He took another step forward, his face contorted with rage. You will all pay for this. All of you. I know people. I have connections. The only contact you'll have right now is with the police, Vin said calmly, taking out his phone. Who I'm calling right now? Morton's anger turned to fury. He lunged forward, knocking over a table in his path, and headed straight for Marina. You. It's all because of you. I lost everything because of you, you bastard. But before he could get any closer, several people blocked his path. Jason, a couple of other waiters, and even some customers stood up, forming a human shield between Morton and Marina. Not another step, Jason warned. Morton paused, his eyes darting from one face to the other. For the first time, he looked confused, as if he couldn't believe that his usual scare tactics weren't working anymore. You will all regret it, he said, but without his previous confidence. All. The police are on their way, Vin said calmly, slipping the phone into his pocket. You have 2 options, Morton. Walk out of here on your own, or wait until they take you out in handcuffs. Morton stood there, breathing heavily, his hands clenching and unclenching, as if he were fighting the urge to attack someone. Then he looked at Marina, who was standing behind his colleagues. You will regret this day, he said through clenched teeth. I swear, I will find you. Is that a threat? Marina's voice was unexpectedly firm. She stepped forward, even as Jason tried to hold her back. Because if it is, I want everyone here to hear it, and I'm recording it. She took out her phone and turned on the voice recorder. Repeat that, please. I want this to go into the police report. Morton stared at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. Something like fear flickered in his eyes. He didn't recognize this confident woman who was openly confronting him. This was not the Marina he had been bullying and blackmailing for months. His mask of confidence finally shattered. He took a step back, then another. You're all crazy, he muttered. All of you, a bunch of lunatics. And turning around, he quickly headed towards the exit. Already at the door, he turned around for the last time. This is not the end. With these words, he ran out into the street, almost colliding with two policemen who were just climbing the steps of the restaurant. There was silence inside. Then Jason turned to Marina. Are you okay? She took a deep breath, then nodded, surprised at her own calm. Yes, I'm fine. And the amazing thing was, it was true. The fear that had paralyzed her for months was gone. Not because the source of the fear was gone. Morton was still there, outside the restaurant, angry and vengeful, but because she was no longer alone against him. Vin walked up to her. It was brave, he said respectfully, and clever to write down his threats. I'm tired of being afraid, Marina replied simply. For too long I've let fear control my life. Vin nodded, realizing that behind those simple words lay a long and painful journey. The police entered the room, and Mike went to them to explain the situation. Little by little, the restaurant returned to normal. The customers resumed their interrupted conversations. The waiters returned to their duties. Marina looked at them. Her colleagues who had just stood between her and danger. At Jason, who had taken the first step forward. At the visitors who had not remained indifferent spectators but had joined the defense. And she realized that she would never be alone again. 6 months later, the Fast and Furious restaurant on Crescent Avenue was lit up, but it was a different light now. Warm, inviting, genuine. The sign was the same, but everything else had changed. Marina stood at the entrance, greeting the guests. Her new position, Deputy Director of Human Resources at Fast and Furious New York office, was the result of her hard work on the special committee to improve working conditions that Vin had created after the incident. Although some still whispered about favoritism, most colleagues acknowledged that she had earned the promotion with her initiative and deep understanding of personnel issues. But Vin knew better. He saw her not as a victim, but as someone who had been through trials and tribulations and emerged stronger. Someone who, despite fear and pressure, had found the strength to stand up to abuse. These were the kind of people he believed would shape the new culture at his company. How did the meeting go? Asked Jason, now the head bartender. Productive, Marina smiled. We have approved a new employee support program, including psychological assistance and legal consultations for those who encounter problems at work. What about Morton? Any news? Marina nodded. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is still investigating, but preliminary findings already show violations. While there is no formal ruling yet, attorneys are confident that the case against Morton is very strong. In the meantime, the court has already issued a preliminary injunction preventing him from working in our restaurant chain. That's it? Jason frowned. After everything he's done? This is just the beginning, Marina said confidently. Legal processes take time, but justice is on our side. Plus, 3 more of his former victims from other restaurants have joined us and filed their testimonies. So his problems are only getting worse. Jason nodded in satisfaction. Justice is slowly but surely doing its job. Yes, and not just for us. Marina glanced around the restaurant, where the staff worked in an atmosphere of mutual respect and support. For everyone. At that moment, the doors opened and Vin Diesel walked in, accompanied by an elegant older woman leaning on his arm. Mom! Marina hurried to them. You didn't say you'd come today. It's a surprise, smiled Sofia Ramirez, Marina's mother. The disease had left its marks on her face, but her eyes were alive. Mr. Diesel insisted that I see for myself the place where my daughter, the director, works. Marina hugged her mother, then looked gratefully at Vin. Thank you for bringing her. Your mother is an amazingly strong woman, Vin said. Now I understand who you take after. Sophia looked at her daughter proudly. Marina has always been strong. It's just that sometimes we forget about our strength when there is too much fear and uncertainty around. True, Vin agreed, but now I hope no one in Fast and Furious will feel afraid anymore. They walked to a table reserved for them in a quiet corner of the room. The restaurant's large windows offered a view of New York in the evening. A city of lights and opportunities, a city where you can get lost, but also find yourself. Marina looked at her mother, at Vin, at her colleagues, at the customers enjoying the evening in the restaurant. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here, from fear and despair to strength and hope. Just a month ago, she was a cornered victim, afraid to move for fear of losing the job her mother depended on. Today, she was the person who helped shape the policies of an entire restaurant chain, the person who gave a voice to those who had once been afraid to speak. Her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from Sarah, the former hostess Morton had fired. Thank you for not backing down. Thanks to you, I believe in justice again. See you at the committee meeting on Friday? Marina smiled and quickly typed a reply. Absolutely. Together we will make workplaces safe for everyone. She put her phone away and joined the conversation, feeling that here and now in this restaurant, among these people, she had finally found what she had been looking for. Not just a job, but a place where she was valued, where her voice mattered, where she could be herself without fear. And it was worth all the trials. The mother took her hand and said quietly, I'm proud of you, Marina. I always have been. Marina squeezed her hand back, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. But now they were tears of happiness. You know, she said, looking at her mother, at Vin, at the entire restaurant that had become a symbol of her liberation. I'm proud of myself, too. And at that moment, she realized that fear no longer controlled her life. The fight was not over yet. Justice was moving along its slow path. But the most important thing had already happened. She was freed from within. The future no longer frightened, but inspired. To new beginnings, she said quietly, raising her glass. To freedom, Vin replied, and their glasses met with a melodic ringing that echoed throughout the room, where fear no longer reigned.